We often hear about productivity, as this relentless drive to just do more, be more efficient.
Right.
But have you ever stopped and wondered if that whole approach sometimes feels a bit, well, empty?
Hmm.
Like we're just chasing achievements without maybe a deeper sense of why? That question really got me thinking when I looked at the material you, the learner, sent over these excerpts from The Productive Muslim.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, who wants to, get the key information without feeling totally overwhelmed, this deep dive is designed to do just that.
Okay.
We're aiming to pull out the most valuable insights from this book, which really uniquely blends Islamic principles with, well, modern ideas about productivity.
Yeah, it's definitely not your standard list of life hacks and tools, is it?
Not at all.
We're exploring how a faith-based perspective might fundamentally change how we even think about getting things done. I'm really quite eager to see what we uncover here. Okay, so let's start unpacking this.
Well, one of the first things that jumps out really is the acknowledgments section. It's huge.
It is, isn't it?
It's like a testament to the sheer number of people, this sort of army he mentions, supporters, editors, thinkers who actually contributed to this work. He specifically calls out Sharif Bana from Awakening Worldwide and Nils Parker of Command's Content for their pivotal roles.
And it's not just one or two names. It's a long list. People like Amin Ibrahim Tillali and many others who were part of the Productive Muslim team right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It really does highlight that collaborative spirit, doesn't it? Even in those early days, it feels like it wasn't something built in isolation at all.
That's such a crucial point, I think. It really underscores that achieving anything meaningful, often involves a whole network of support.
Mm-hmm.
He also expresses gratitude to the writers for the platform, the readers, his family, especially his parents, for backing what he calls his unconventional path.
Right.
It just emphasizes that even when you're forging a unique direction, that community aspect is vital.
He even gives a really sweet shout out to his young child, hoping the book will offer guidance down the line. It's quite striking how much he emphasizes this whole web of people.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture for you, the learner, it immediately kind of suggests that your own support systems, colleagues, friends, family, they're just invaluable, really, in helping you achieve your goals.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we rarely succeed entirely on our own steam.
Okay, so here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. The book then takes this critical look at how we often approach productivity today.
Right.
It suggests that by focusing purely on our physical, our biological needs, this whole survival of the fittest mentality,
Right.
well, we might be overlooking something really fundamental about what it means to be human.
And what's fascinating is the question it then raises. Can integrating faith back into the equation, can that help us find a better balance? Can it move us beyond just chasing material achievements in our drive to be productive? It introduces this idea that life is, a journey with purpose, a kind of responsibility or trust.
Trust, yeah.
And that our core beliefs significantly influence how we navigate that whole journey.
And there's this really thought-provoking statement mentioned, "I am as my servant thinks of me." That really stood out.
It did.
It hints at this powerful connection between our mindset, our expectations, and, what we ultimately experience or achieve.
Exactly. And it builds on this by saying that a truly meaningful existence isn't just about, getting by day to day. It's about having hope. It's about making a contribution and being productive within this framework of faith.
It really makes me think that faith provides this kind of underlying why, the motivation for productivity. It's not just about ticking off more tasks. It's about the intention, the values driving those actions.
That's a key insight there for you, the learner. It suggests that perhaps your deepest motivations aren't just about the external rewards, but they're rooted much deeper in your core values and your understanding of your place in the world.
Okay, and the actual story behind the Productive Muslim brand itself is quite interesting too.
It is, yeah. The author apparently set out with two main aims. One, to gather knowledge on productivity specifically from an Islamic perspective. And two, to inspire Muslims to lead more, productive lives.
And the name itself, Productive Muslim, it came about almost by chance, didn't it?
Yeah.
The phrase just popped into his head one morning back in 2007, and he immediately registered the domain name. Just a gut feeling, it seems.
But it wasn't an instant success, right?
Mm-hmm.
He describes that initial attempt as, well, a bit of a flop trying to create gadget blogs aimed at a Muslim audience. Apparently, it just didn't quite click.
Which highlights, I suppose, that finding the right path often involves a bit of trial and error.
True.
He then went off, pursued further studies, and felt this sense of dissatisfaction afterwards. The idea of revisiting the blog came up again, but, with the memory of that initial setback lingering.
And this is the bit I found really relatable. It was just a simple message from his flatmate's younger brother, a young reader who'd enjoyed the early blog posts. And that was what rekindled the whole project. It shows how a small bit of encouragement can make such a huge difference sometimes.
It's such a powerful reminder for all of us, for you, the learner, that sometimes the most significant encouragement comes from completely unexpected places.
Totally.
And from that little spark, apparently it grew into what he describes as a major online resource for Muslims today.
It really does tie back beautifully to that earlier point about the importance of community support, even in the very, very early stages of an idea.
Precisely. And if we connect this origin story to that idea of aligning your efforts with a deeper sense of purpose, it suggests that when what you're doing really resonates with your values, you're probably more likely to push through the challenges.
Okay, now the book delves into some core principles, and it starts with a really powerful verse from the Quran, verse 13.11. Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. That really sets the stage, doesn't it, for the practical advice that follows.
It does, and it clearly identifies who this book is really aimed at. People feeling a bit lost, maybe lacking clear direction, or struggling to juggle their various responsibilities, particularly their faith obligations, alongside everything else.
The book then offers this pretty straightforward definition of what it means to be unproductive.
Yeah.
Feeling lethargic, easily distracted, or just constantly rushed and hurried.
Yeah, simple but effective.
It's a simple but effective way to kind of check in with ourselves, I think.
And that definition then naturally leads into the book's core focus.
Yeah.
How do you manage your energy, your focus, and your time, but all viewed through this specific Islamic lens?
Now, there's a really insightful point made here, I thought. The author notes that someone, say, engrossed in video games might actually exhibit intense focus, high energy, and spend considerable time.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily translate to being productive in a truly meaningful way.
Which raises a crucial question for you, the learner. What's the role of intention and purpose in defining what real productivity actually is? It highlights that those three elements, energy, focus, time, they need to be directed towards something that genuinely aligns with your values and your bigger goals.
Okay, the book then moves on to critique some mainstream productivity approaches. It argues that the world, and that includes many Muslims, has largely adopted these models without really considering their potential disconnect from, faith and core values.
What's fascinating is the contrast the author then draws with what he calls a historically proven model of productivity, one that he argues fueled the golden age of Islamic civilization.
See, that's a perspective I hadn't really considered before, looking at historical Islamic achievements specifically through the lens of, productivity principles.
Well, if we connect this to your desire to be well-informed, the learner, it prompts us to think, doesn't it? What might have been the driving forces behind that era?
Yeah, what was different?
Was it a different work ethic, a stronger sense of collective purpose, maybe a value system that inherently linked faith and worldly contribution? These are definitely questions worth pondering.
Okay, now, let's talk about purpose. The book emphasizes that having a sense of purpose is, a huge motivator in modern psychology, too.
Yeah.
Right alongside things like autonomy and mastery.
Sure, but what's insightful here is the critique it offers of the often shallow, that's the word used, and kind of limited purposes that sometimes drive productivity in our consumer-driven society.
Right.
Goals that might not connect to a deeper sense of meaning or a relationship with something greater than ourselves, the creator.
The book then introduces two key roles that, according to Quranic verses mentioned, 2.30 and 51.56, God assigns to humanity. Being a servant of Allah Abd, and being a vice-errant, a steward on earth.
Let's maybe unpack that meaning of abd a bit. The author explains it as complete submission and obedience, but crucially, not in a restrictive sense.
Right.
Instead, it encompasses all aspects of life, trying to align our actions with what we believe is pleasing to God. It's about living with this constant awareness of that relationship.
I know sometimes the term servant or even slave can feel a bit strong or negative for some people today. The book does address this.
It does.
Reframing it as actually a form of liberation, liberation from being enslaved to, say, worldly desires or our egos or just fleeting trends. It's about consciously choosing a different, higher kind of servitude.
Which raises an important question for you, the learner. If you consciously choose to orient your life around a higher purpose like this, does that provide a more solid, more stable foundation for your productivity and maybe your overall well-being? The book certainly argues that this framework offers real clarity and direction.
It feels like a fundamental shift in perspective, doesn't it? Moving from a purely self-focused approach to one that's centered on something bigger than just oneself.
Precisely. It suggests our primary motivation shifts from simply what's in it for me to something more like, how does this action align with my purpose and my values?
Right.
And this intrinsic drive, the one rooted in faith, becomes a really powerful source of productivity.
The conversation then shifts, logically, I think, to the importance of values and productivity. The book stresses that just pursuing productivity without a strong ethical foundation can actually lead to negative stuff like burnout, stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's valuable here is the introduction of these core Islamic values, things like amana, which is trustworthiness, sidq, honesty, ihsan, striving for excellence, adl, justice, rahma, mercy, and rifq, gentleness, all derive from Islamic teachings.
And these aren't just like abstract concepts floating around. The book explains how actually embodying these values in our daily lives benefits both us as individuals and the wider community by fostering integrity, respect.
It also critiques those approaches that prioritize just maximum output at absolutely all costs, potentially sacrificing well-being and ethical considerations along the way.
So the key message seems to be that living by these Islamic values isn't some kind of barrier to being productive. Actually, it can enhance it.
Exactly.
By bringing out the best in people and ensuring that our efforts are aligned with what's genuinely important in the long run.
And that focus on the hereafter, the afterlife, provides this long-term perspective, helping us maybe balance our various roles as employees, parents, community members, rather than getting totally consumed by one role at the expense of others.
It definitely makes you consider how you might, actively try to integrate these kinds of values into your work and your interactions every single day.
And if we connect these values to the bigger picture for you, the learner, they really speak to this idea of sustainable productivity, don't they?
Sustainable, yeah, that's a good word.
Efforts grounded in solid ethical principles are just more likely to have a lasting positive impact for yourself and for others.
Okay, but this leads to a really important, maybe slightly uncomfortable question the book tackles. If Islam emphasizes productivity so much, why do we often see this perception or maybe reality of lower productivity in many Muslim communities today? The book directly addresses this unproductive ummah paradox.
Yeah, and it cautions against immediately just blaming external factors, It stresses the need for some honest internal reflection. It points out some pretty stark contrasts. Things like high rates of illiteracy despite Islam's emphasis on reading, ikra, high unemployment despite the call to work, imalu, and fewer contributions to fields like science despite the encouragement of reflection, tafakkur.
It's quite a sobering comparison, isn't it? Especially when you remember the incredible historical contributions of Islamic civilization in, practically every field.
The book suggests the decline isn't solely because of external pressures, but also due to certain misconceptions that have kind of taken root within Muslim communities over time, affecting the collective subconscious, perhaps?
Right. So what are some of these misunderstandings that might be holding things back, according to the book? One key misconception discussed is this idea of despising dunya, looking down on the material world and using that as an excuse for not being actively engaged and productive citizens in it.
And what's insightful here is the reinterpretation offered. The book strongly emphasizes that this world, this dunya, is actually considered the farmland for the hereafter. Our actions, our efforts in this life have direct consequences for the next. The two are intrinsically linked, not separate.
It gives practical examples, doesn't it? Like needing to both, say, update your CV and make sincere prayers, dua, when you're looking for a job.
Exactly.
Highlighting the importance of combining that practical effort with spiritual reliance. You need both.
Another crucial misunderstanding explored is the concept of sabr, often just translated as patience.
Right.
The book clarifies that it's not meant to be about passive waiting, just sitting back. It's about actively persevering, taking the necessary steps, the means, while maintaining faith and trust. It references the steadfastness of past prophets and the Prophet Muhammad's own actions, like his strategic migration from Makkah.
And the whole idea of righteousness, or birr, is broadened beyond just ritual acts of worship, too. The book explains that any good deed done sincerely for God, with a positive impact on yourself or others, is considered righteous, even something as seemingly simple as planting a tree that benefits others.
Which really reframes what it means to be a good and productive member of society, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about your spiritual practices in isolation. It encompasses your physical efforts, your social contributions, everything.
Okay, the book then tackles the, let's be honest, pretty complex topic of destiny, qadar, and free will.
Always a tricky one.
Yeah, but it makes it very clear that the concept of destiny shouldn't be twisted into some kind of justification for inaction or fatalism.
Right. It lays out 3 key principles to understand it. First, God's ultimate knowledge and overall plan. Second, humanity's genuine free will to make choices within that plan. Yeah. That's the test.
To test it.
And third, the guidance provided through prophets and scriptures to help us make good choices.
So the important takeaway seems to be that our daily choices genuinely do matter. They contribute to the path we take. And aligning our intentions, our will, with what we believe is pleasing to God can actually lead to a more supported and fulfilling life journey.
Exactly. And rather than feeling restrictive or predetermined, the belief in destiny, when understood correctly, should actually be an empowering spiritual booster.
Empowering.
Motivating us to be grateful for what we have and to strive to do good with the faith that our sincere efforts will be acknowledged and rewarded.
Finally, near the end, the book introduces these 3 key spheres of productivity: the spiritual, the physical, and the social. It presents them as a framework for managing our energy, focus, and time in a more holistic way.
Yeah, it breaks it down nicely. The spiritual sphere is obviously about our connection with Allah, our soul. The physical is about our health, our well-being. And the social covers our interactions, our relationships, our contributions to others.
And it presents this comprehensive picture, like a model of Islamic productivity with purpose, values, and our spiritual core right at the center, aiming for ultimate rewards in the hereafter and managed day to day through these 3 interconnected spheres. It feels like a very balanced, integrated approach.
Absolutely. It really underscores that these areas of our lives aren't separate compartments. They deeply influence one another. Neglecting one sphere can definitely impact the others negatively.
The deep dive pretty much concludes by highlighting the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the ultimate example of productivity,
right?
Attributing it to the immense barakah, or blessings, in his actions. It even cites Michael Hart's assessment from his book, The 100, noting his profound success on both religious and secular levels throughout history.
And the final thought really emphasizes that taqwa, which you could translate as mindfulness of God, consciousness of God, maybe striving for excellence out of that awareness, is fundamental for living a truly noble and productive life. And that's applicable to everyone, whatever their circumstances.
So for you, the learner, wrapping this up, our deep dive into these excerpts from The Productive Muslim has really shown us, I think, how deeply intertwined our faith, our sense of purpose, and our daily actions can be, how they combine to shape a truly productive life. It's clearly about so much more than just ticking boxes or getting things done. It's about aligning all our efforts with what we hold most meaningful.
And the key insight, maybe the core takeaway, is the importance of grounding your whole pursuit of productivity in a framework that goes beyond just material gains or worldly success. It's about connecting your work, your energy, your life to that sense of higher, maybe even eternal purpose.
So here's a final thought, perhaps, for you, the learner, to mull over. Considering everything we've talked about today, how might you intentionally begin to integrate your own core beliefs and values more consciously into your daily approach to productivity? How can you perhaps move towards a more holistic, more fulfilling way of living and working, one that honors both your present responsibilities and your future aspirations? It's definitely something to continue exploring.